Are you ready to become a change maker? Our 48-week postgraduate program in public policy or the PGP may be just the thing for you. This hybrid program is designed to give you both the theoretical foundation and hands-on experience needed to excel in policy making. With a mix of expert-led webinars, in-person workshops, and policy simulation exercises, you'll gain real-world skills along with personalized mentorship. Through our policy programs, we connect good people to good ideas and good networks. Apply now at the link in the description to make an impact.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of All Things Policy. This is Swathi Kalyani, Research Analyst, and I'm joined by Dr. Nithiyanandam, Head of the Geospatial Programme at the Takshashila Institution. And today we are going to discuss about the rising temperatures in India. So Nithya, do you feel summer is already here?
I think the answer is yes, because we are all feeling hot in different parts of the country now.
Yes, since April is not far away, and according to WMO and IMD, they had actually predicted that 2025 will be one of the warmest years. I think it's better to start discussing this topic of rising temperatures and heat waves in India. And to give a background of this topic, recently IMD a few days ago had issued alerts to states like Karnataka and Kerala regarding the rising temperatures. In Karnataka, the north interior districts and the coastal districts were warned that they can expect a temperature between 37 to 39 degrees Celsius. There were yellow alerts for districts like Palakkad and Ernakulam in Kerala. And there are certain standards which IMD maintains to declare as a heat wave, and it actually differs according to the regions. For example, in plains, it is like if it is more than 40 degrees Celsius for 2 consecutive days, it will be declared as a heat wave. But in coastal areas, if it is more than 37 degrees Celsius, it can be a heat wave. And for any region, a temperature above 45 degrees Celsius, they will declare it as a heat wave. And anything more than 47 degrees Celsius will be called a severe heat wave. So also, this is not something just that happens in India, because last year we saw such incidents in countries like USA, Canada, Pakistan, and there were major impacts of it. One of the worst heat waves that India had seen was in 2016, which recorded like a highest temperature of actually above 51 degrees Celsius in Rajasthan. And that's when NDMA issued these comprehensive guidelines for heat waves, and even IMD had actually improved its forecasting measures and dissemination of information, which we will go about in detail. And since there are worrying impacts, there are at least 100 deaths which happen per year in India itself. There is economic concerns. There is other standard of life concerns which come into play. Let's get into the questions. And Nithya, you have actually worked regarding these urban heat islands and increasing temperatures. So I think it would be really useful to have your insights on this topic.
Thanks, Swati, for having me today. Yeah, you have actually touched upon a topic which some of us feeling the pain right now in different parts of the country. But then, we are going to face a tough, summer ahead. And this is not just in 2025. We are seeing the increasing pattern in 2023 and 2024 as well, right? While there are several causes, which has made the impact multiple folds at people level. So we'll discuss few of those things in later on. But the worrying concern at this moment is early rise in temperature, even in March in different parts of the country.
So let's start with the social impact first. How does this rising temperature, or what we call as heat waves in India, I mean, the definition varies across. How does this play a crucial role, and how does it impact the social life of normal citizens, the daily life of citizens?
So maybe I will go, slightly wider than the, social also. Let's start at people level, like individual level, right? This rising temperature first are likely to impact the thermal comfort. people tend to increase the cooling demand, and the electricity bill will go high. This will definitely impact individuals, right? But it's not just the cooling demand increase, it is also the health impact. So the outbreak of epidemics, and also health impacts related to heat, such as heat cramps, heat strokes, and it also creates more stress on people with comorbidity, especially we call the elderly and infants are more vulnerable groups to the heat impacts. So this is at people level. Society at large, sometimes people face migration due to the extreme heat impact, and sometimes people, some parts people face epidemic outbreaks, as I said earlier, and places get drought, and it causes severe loss in agricultural production, and thus people gets multiple folds increase of subsequent products and so on. It's not just about people, society. When it comes to industry also, like, it directly affects two ways. One is the operational efficiency of machines and people over there, and the second is the overall thermal comfort requirement of that areas. So that again impacts. And overall, this is not a good sign for an economy, and it's also not a good sign for individuals. So heat is considered as one of a troubling factor, especially in Indian case also.
Uh, let's now talk about the factors that cause such rise temperatures. I'm sure there are multiple perspectives. There is an environmental angle, climate angle, and also anthropogenic angles. Let's touch upon those factors.
Right. So it's a question of what actually causes heat, right? What actually causes increase in temperature, to be very specific. And we all know it became deadly when temperature also increases and humidity also increases, right? Now, there are a few terms which comes to my mind. One is, you know, um, climate change, and which people believe like it is a global impact. Maybe you have not done anything at your end, but then you are getting suffered just because it's a global effect. Second is heat wave. Well, it has a mix of both the impact which carried from a longer distance, and then the local impacts will also get something called heat wave. I will go through the definition of heat wave later on. But there's one more thing called urban heat island. People feel this is something where each individual cities are contributing to the rise in temperature, while the global impacts are, let's keep that aside. The local impacts also adds more pressure to the system, and it eventually leads to a cascading effect of heat impacts. And the last one is anthropogenic emission. That is somehow connected with urban heat island, but then it precisely tells out the reason for the rising heat. That is human emission. Whereas in urban heat islands, it's generally believes the urban area is slightly warmer than the rural areas. But then here, an anthropogenic heat emission means that be it in urban or rural area, the artificial heat that human being generates, that leads to the rise in temperature. So the only difference I would like to say between urban heat island and anthropogenic heat is urban heat island is generally perceived as an impact in bigger cities. But there's a lot of research being conducted and been shown that this effect is no longer restricted to bigger cities. It is also there in the newly formed towns and cities. There are many reasons for it, and we'll discuss that later on. But anthropogenic heat emission is considered as a primary reason for that. And it's not just in urban areas, the core urban areas, the outskirts of the cities are also, warmer in certain parts of India. That's mostly due to the kind of land which is available and its exposure to sunlight and so on. While all these are the local effects, the global effects come from the heat waves, right, and climate change. What is climate change for a larger audience? I'll make it quick. The climate change, if there is a change in pattern, if there is an alteration, like what we are seeing, like the summer period much ahead of a regular period in the past, or the delayed in monsoon, all these are considered as climate change impact. And especially heat wave is something where, as you have also mentioned, heat wave definition is not uniform across different places, and it is not even uniform across different parts of the world. Let's say in Europe, it is largely taken as 5% deviation, that is a 5% increase from the top 5% observed values in the past 30 years. So that becomes a thumb rule for somebody to define whether the area is constantly under rising heat or the constantly under temperature increases. This helps people to identify whether the area is under heat wave or not. In simple terms, if an area experiences higher temperature for a continuous period, that is termed as an area under heat wave impact.
I think one interesting point where you said about the climate change is also because if there is a rise in temperature, I'm sure the cooling initiatives also increase. For example, again, our demand of electricity increases, which again leads to increase in emissions. And then it just becomes a whole cycle where it's a continuous of one increase will lead to another increase, and then it will go on to the next year again. Interesting point. And also, you talked about these variations in urban heat and rural heat and the temperatures in these particular regions. Can you talk about the nexus between these two regions and or the difference which exists, or how actually we focus on one more than the other? Probably you can talk about that.
Yeah, I'll talk about the urban-rural nexus, but before that, what you have actually said is right. This is a nexus between the impacts, right? For example, if you have impact on one, then it will create impact on other. Let's put it out in a very simple term. Suppose a person is utilizing his own air conditioner to make his room cool, right? And if a temperature outside rises by 1 degree Celsius, he or she also need to adjust the indoor temperature by bringing down the air condition for, let's say, from 24 to 23 or 22. What it actually costs, it makes the person comfortable within the room, but then the heat which is produced or heat which is taken out from the room is pushed outside to an ambient atmosphere. Now, the temperature of the outside environment is again increased because of the heat we have released there. And it may get dissipated to the nearby areas, or it will at least affect the immediate microclimate that exists in that area.
Exactly, yeah.
So then it will again increase the temperature, it requires the cooling demand. So it's a cycle, right? So that is what the multiple impacts of this. Now, distinguishing urban and rural impacts, where if you ask anybody who works on this area, the primary cause for urban heat island, people will first vote for, impervious surfaces. That is, in simple terms, concrete surfaces, where the heat is more emitted instead of a ground where even if you consider an open ground and this concrete surfaces, the concrete surfaces are tend to emit more heat. Whereas in some parts of the country, especially for example, if you take out Delhi as an example, at times at Delhi NCR, the outskirts has some of the farmlands which are, available, and it is exposed completely to sun after, once it is harvested. Now, the heat which actually falls on the surface emits a higher radiation compared to what you can get it on an urban area. At least the urban area comes with certain mitigating factors, like you have trees, even it is dispersed vegetation, and you have wide range of vegetative surfaces that even exist in some part of this. Whereas if this kind of open lands for acres and acres, which are completely shaved and without any trees and so on, generally sends out more of heat, and that indicates at times the rural areas are exposing more heat because of the heat emitted from the surfaces, and especially when a wind blows, that's too much of heat which the villagers face, and compared to the urban extent. So this has happened in peculiar way in few areas, but in general, urban heat island is an issue of urban setup where people feels the urban area at large acts as an island, and which has an elevated temperature compared to its surrounding rural areas. And then later, remote sensing help people to identify it's not just an entire urban area is one heat island. There are many islands within the urban areas where when people studied microclimatic conditions within the city, they found out the different parts of city acts as an island itself. So this is how the urban areas heat impact and rural areas heat impacts are studied through modern technologies today.
Interesting. Actually, I remember even when we used to study these remote sensing technology, there were these concept of terrestrial radiations, which is like the released waves from Earth. How does it increase the temperature in a few meters across the atmosphere? And I think that really correlates to this fact. And so understanding that this does have a huge impact, for example, that it is not just to urban areas or not just to one country or not just to one individual, it's a more wider impact, and also has correlations to food security. For example, as you said, if it's impacting the agricultural areas, surely the productivity is supposed to go down, hence the production and also hence the livelihood of those farmers who are dependent
Right.
on this. So how can we minimize this impact? I mean, I'm sure there'll be some measures which are taken, but yes, more about it.
See, we can minimize the impact by working towards finding a solutions for some of the larger impacts. I'll go one by one, right? The first at city scale, everybody works on this wheel, largely picks out two mitigating factors. One is the vegetative surfaces, the other one is the water bodies. But we know in reality increasing water body is literally a challenging stuff, where on the contrary we are seeing diminishing water bodies over the years. Now, if you really have to increase the water bodies on the urban extent, perhaps people utilizing other ways like recycling waters and then utilizing recycling water to plant trees and other things on the road, and also spraying those waters in the that particular period on the road so that it can minimize the heat impact. That's being strategy followed by few municipal administrators. On the other way around, planning cities is also important at large, because it's not just water. I said increasing green cover is also an important thing. There are certain efforts taken to emphasize to have particular percentage of green cover on each of the cities. But do people play smart in this case? Instead of having it in different parts of the city, sometimes the outskirts are being annexed to the larger cities, and in papers it shows like a particular percentage is met, but it does not solve the actual requirement, because the actual need for those vegetative surfaces is to mitigate heat in different parts of the city. Just by annexing an outskirt will not help in this case. So this is another one. In addition, people follows certain mitigation factors at individual level, like in cooling roof or going for urban agriculture, by keeping a roof less capable of holding heat, and making painting your building facades in bright colors, like especially white color, not in dark colors, which can absorb heat and trap it, and then creates heat impacts later in the evening. So these are certain measures taken, and during the heat wave, the nodal agencies have issued certain recommendations to drink more water, avoid getting into heat, and and getting into shades and so on. But then these are very you can say a very fundamental recommendation that people can follow. But with the advent of technology today, what else we can look at? We can actually map the vulnerable communities. Rather than saying this entire region in a particular state is vulnerable, is it possible for us to say the particular area in Karnataka, even within Bengaluru, is prone, given that the temperature exposure is this, the local contributing factors are this, and the morphology that exists on ground also create another folded impact to this. So if we can plan in that way, the actual impact on that ground would be measured. In addition, one needs to know where elderly population and infants are present, what is the density of them. Then we can able to do multiple analysis. And I didn't see this as a sole responsibility of government. I also see this as a responsibility of private entrepreneurs who can step into new innovative solutions by creating products which can provide, solutions to needy people, and who can connect them to emergency responses and more innovative way of preventing them from heat exposure and so on. So these are some of the things we can do at, in addition to the policy measures largely the cities can look into it.
I remember the heat action plans, which actually came up after these heat waves becoming so frequent. And I believe Ahmedabad had its own HAP and initiatives like the Miyawaki forests or like urban jungles, which were like, and they have put some initiatives into that. And there are also actually global examples. Singapore actually is well acclaimed for its measures to at least the efforts that it takes to cool down its cities, especially during these summer months. And because it has become more frequent across the countries and across the continents, there are also Canada trying its more research and development regarding this heat waves, and also something called heat domes, which have been quite frequent in the last year. And also, can we talk about these vulnerable communities a little more? Because this concept of urban slums is existing in India, and also the expanding urban slums, and how probably remote sensing capabilities could detect these roofing variations. I mean, I'm sure the materials that's used for certain houses are different, and how it could actually help in these mapping at least these areas would be useful.
Yeah, these are a set of multiple questions which are very important and interesting. So let me answer one by one. The first thing is the efforts taken by different cities, right? You have specified few cities like Ahmedabad and Hyderabad also had some initiatives. These are the players who initially recognized heat as an impact. Otherwise, heat is invisible, right? We don't even have right mechanism to record heat impact in a detailed way, where our medical infrastructure limits the recording of heat impacts in an actual way. And a lot of time it is recorded at the time of postmortem when somebody died, and on the road, and then during postmortem it is documented the person got heat exposure and heat stroke and then passed away eventually. So other way around, if you look at the number of cases which are medically recorded in heat waves, which are much underestimated, and compared to olden days in a sense, I say 15 years ago, before we realized heat as a disaster at national level, the number of deaths in different parts of the country were high, especially in the coastal cities. Coastal states used to claim heat impacts death are higher. That is overestimation of heat deaths, because the numbers are pretty much high and higher on the newspapers picks up and then speaks about it. But then the medical data which supports that was very limited. Now those kind of alarming news are not coming out, like the deaths in terms of thousands, but the way of estimating actual heat impact is still minimum, and it's not improving anything. Well, the cities have taken few efforts. Ahmedabad is a good example where the heat action plan worked to some extent, including cooling roof, painting roofs in white and so on, which gives them the better albedo, which means the heat is allowed to reflect from the surface rather than being trapped on the surface. Trapping is actually causing that heat dissipation into the building. Now, while this has been a past story, but why not other cities can adapt the same thing, right? Because the increasing trend of rising temperature is evident in last few years, but it's not happening. Why? Uh, you know, one size does not fit to all the problems. Every city is not same. The causative factors are different. For that, one need to understand what is actually causing more heat on a particular city, and what are the possible mitigation factors one can look into it. Maybe you can increase a green cover, or maybe you can increase the spread of water, or maybe you can plan it in a better way, or maybe you can allow more winds to flow within a city by working or reworking or restructuring the certain factors on the ground. But there are certain cities like Gurugram has taken efforts to do that, just because the administrators have realized the importance of it and want to develop a heat action plan. But that requires a detailed understanding of ground structures, ground objects. There comes the geospatial technology where it helps to understand in a better way. But it requires a lot of fine understanding of contributing factors like anthropogenic heat emission sources and so on to model it precisely. That is why it's not happening in every cities in the country. But as you said, Singapore and to some extent Hong Kong worked on this research for a long time compared to India. The reason for that is those are the people who identified it as a main problem because they have more and more high-rise buildings. Singapore and Hong Kong, you can say they have more similar challenges in this. And the studies has been conducted at various using various remote sensing and geospatial data sets for a very long time. But the kind of technology which has helped to identify that, it's deploying people on ground in terms of ground crews and traversing using vehicles and looking at things from lower earth, including helicopter-based thermography and measuring things at particular places, the key places using, weather stations, and also, continuously monitoring the larger city from satellites. These are the combinations required. In fact, I was privileged to manage one of the world largest urban heat island research, including a field work in Hong Kong. But for do so, we need to have a lot of infrastructure. For I'm sure we require few more efforts to build that infrastructure and to promote researchers of that kind. Other than these cities in Asia, China has been doing this work for some of the cities. And accordingly, the lessons learned and the way to mitigate the heat. You can only mitigate to some extent and minimize it to some extent. You can't completely, avert the situation. So that is what we all need to do. Perhaps policymakers may need to look at working towards creating more awareness, promoting technological developments and entrepreneurship to solve this problem, and also ensuring that the heat action plan kind of stuff is enforced on every cities, as it won't be a difficult task when we envisage the implementation of national geospatial policy. The moment we get digital twin, what we are talking about is a 3-dimension of things above and below the surfaces. Then that is a fantastic data which can help us to model the impact, and we can even visualize the potential impact areas. In fact, we can predict the potential areas for heat impact in subsequent seasons and so on. By working more on advanced geospatial technologies and advanced climatic models, especially at urban scale, and understanding more on microclimatic conditions can definitely help people and policymakers to manage the situation.
Anyways, so we have, as India has acknowledged this as a problem, surely as NDMA is working towards it, cities are working towards it, state disaster management authorities are working towards it, but surely needs more efforts and needs to actually pace up its development in managing this phenomenon and ensuring at least some safe zones and security nets for these vulnerable, especially for these vulnerable communities. Thank you, Nitya. That was surely it gave much better understanding of the situation and its impact across sectors, across communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Swathi. I'll just end, with a note. Heat should not be looked at as a regular affair where things, beyond individuals' control. Heat should be looked at as an peril that can be averted if we all work together. Like, we need to try our own individual levels to minimize its impact, and together we can minimize the impact at society and at cities and at country at large. So thank you, Swathi, for having me. It's a wonderful discussion. I had it with you. Thanks.
And to the listeners, please keep yourself hydrated, at least for the summer, to protect yourselves.
Yeah.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.